Have you ever actually stopped to think about the invisible foundation that's literally holding up our modern digital world? I mean, 3 billion, that massive number, that represents just the Android devices out there running Java. We're not even counting the smart refrigerators, the global financial trading systems, or the back-end architectures for giants like Netflix. Java is absolutely everywhere, just quietly running in the background of our daily lives.
But despite this sheer ubiquity, there's a really persistent rumor floating around the tech world. You've probably heard it. It's this idea that Java is just some archaic, quote-unquote, dinosaur language, right? Like it's a relic of the 90s, slowly suffocating under its own weight, while newer, trendier languages just pass it by. Well, okay, let's dive into this, because I am here to tell you that is a complete myth. The reality? It's actually an epic, multi-decade story of death, survival, and rebirth. So, welcome to our explainer on the true story behind Java. Today, we're going to unpack the absolutely fascinating journey of a platform that has had to ruthlessly reinvent itself, fight off corporate titans, and honestly survive its own near-fatal mistakes just to stay alive. Here's the roadmap for our historical deep dive today. We'll be covering the accidental web pioneer, surviving the browser wars, the open source rebellion, the dark ages of Java, the Great Renaissance, and finally, why the future is unknown. All right, starting off with part 1, the accidental web pioneer, from interactive TV to the web. What's totally incredible about Java is that it was actually born out of a completely failed project. Back in 1991, a team at Sun Microsystems, led by James Gosling, started Project Oak. And they weren't trying to change the internet. They were actually trying to build a platform for interactive cable television. But by 1992, Time Warner rejected their proposal. The whole project fell apart, and the team was literally laid off. But somehow, they managed to claw their way back, return to first principles, and pull off a massive pivot. They saw this crazy new thing called the World Wide Web and realized, hey, our interactive TV technology is exactly what the static, boring internet needs. By 1995, they integrated into the Netscape browser, and boom, Java was officially unleashed onto the world. But getting developers to actually use it, that required some real psychological genius. James Gosling famously called Java's design the mother of all Jedi mind tricks. See, under the hood, Java had these revolutionary, highly academic, and frankly scary features for the time, like automated garbage collection, which invisibly cleaned up computer memory in the background. If they had exposed all that complexity up front, developers would have run for the hills. So Gosling disguised it. He wrapped these radical features inside a very familiar, comfortable, C-like syntax. He essentially lulled engineers into a sense of confidence so they'd adopt it without even realizing they were using something entirely groundbreaking. Which brings us to part 2, surviving the browser wars. David versus Goliath. So Java's massive early success immediately painted a giant target on its back, and it was largely because of this terrifying new promise it made to the industry: write once, run anywhere. Microsoft was terrified. I'm literally losing sleep over this issue. It is undermining my creativity. That was a genuine internal confession from Bill Gates in 1996. Back then, software was fiercely tied to the hardware. If you wrote a program for a Mac, you had to completely rewrite the whole shebang for Windows. Java's cross-platform runtime threatened to make the underlying operating system totally irrelevant. If developers only wrote code for Java, Microsoft's absolute dominance with Windows was in serious jeopardy. And that led to an all-out corporate war. During a massive lawsuit, Discovery revealed this smoking gun internal Microsoft email that simply read, "Screw Sun." Microsoft's strategy was pretty brutal. They licensed Java but intentionally built a version for Windows that completely broke compatibility. They wanted to hijack the platform by forcing developers to write Windows-specific Java code, which would essentially destroy the whole write once, run anywhere magic. But Sun Microsystems fought back viciously in court, ultimately winning a $1.95 billion settlement. It was an incredibly grueling legal battle, but it successfully stopped Microsoft from fracturing the system and saved Java from being extinguished. Moving on to part 3, the open source rebellion, top-down specs versus grassroots code. Having survived Microsoft, you'd think Java was safe, right? Well, by the early 2000s, Java faced a massive new threat: itself. Sun and their corporate partners tried to standardize enterprise development with something called J2EE, and it was a disaster. So the crucial point is, it was this incredibly complex specification that forced developers to write mountains of painful XML, just clunky formatting code, just to do really simple things. A huge number of projects were failing. Java was literally choking on its own enterprise standards. But then, the developer community rebelled. Out of pure frustration, independent developers created lightweight, open-source frameworks like Spring and Hibernate. They just threw out the corporate rulebook and built tools that actually worked for the blue-collar programmer. This grassroots open-source movement succeeded where the top-down corporate specs failed, and it absolutely saved Java from destroying itself.
Let's look at part 4, the dark ages of Java, stagnation and the Oracle buyout. Even with the open-source community thriving, the corporate entity behind Java was bleeding out. When the dot-com bubble burst, Sun Microsystems lost 93% of its value. Because Sun was fighting for its financial life, the Java language stagnated horribly. We're talking 5 agonizing years between major updates. Competing languages like C# were rapidly innovating, while Java just stood still. The community was incredibly frustrated. Then, in 2010, the bombshell dropped. Oracle acquired Sun Microsystems, and the tension in the developer community was just palpable. Oracle was known strictly as a ruthless database and business software company. Developers were terrified that Oracle would lock Java down, kill the open source projects, and start charging ridiculous licensing fees. The future looked incredibly bleak. Which leads to part 5, the Great Renaissance. Teaching an old dog new tricks.
In one of the greatest plot twists in tech history, the Oracle acquisition didn't actually kill Java. To everyone's surprise, Oracle brought rational, decisive management and executed a rapid-fire modernization plan. Step 1, Java 8 introduced Lambdas, which is essentially a way to write compact, streamlined shortcuts, massively reducing the amount of code developers had to write. Step 2, Java 9 completely modularized the massive codebase. But Step 3 was the real game changer. Oracle shifted Java to a strict 6-month release cadence. For decades, Java relied on massive, big bang releases every few years. If a feature wasn't ready, it delayed everything, creating crushing overhead. This 6-month cycle completely removed that stress. If a feature isn't ready today, it just catches the next train in 6 months. It fundamentally changed the development culture and dramatically accelerated Java's evolution.
But we really shouldn't underestimate how difficult this modernization was. Take a look at Java architect Brian Goetz regarding the addition of those lambdas. He would literally come into work asking, "Is today the day I'm going to make a billion-dollar mistake?" The stakes were terrifyingly high. Java runs the global economy. They had to teach an old dog new tricks and add highly modern, complex features without ever breaking backwards compatibility for the billions of devices already running the code. And miraculously, they pulled it off.
Finally, part 6, the future is unknown, preparing for the AI revolution. Java has survived its past, for sure. But how is its invisible foundation evolving for the AI revolution? Well, it is currently curing its own original sins. Project Valhalla is a massive, multi-year initiative designed to fix how Java handles memory by unifying primitive and reference types. Now, what's really interesting about this is what it means in plain English. It's going to make Java incredibly fast and lightweight. When you combine this with Project Panama, which bridges Java to native code, Java is suddenly positioned to be a highly efficient, scalable language perfect for running modern, data-heavy AI inference engines.
And they aren't stopping at memory. Project Loom introduced virtual threads, which seamlessly replace the deeply complicated internals of thread management. You know, the way a program juggles multiple tasks simultaneously. It allows developers to write highly concurrent, scalable server applications with incredibly simple code. It's kind of the perfect metaphor for modern Java. They've figured out how to completely replace the foundation of the house while keeping the entire house resting on top of it completely stable. But technical features aren't the real reason Java survives. 340. That is the number of Java user groups globally. Java has a passionately dedicated community of 10 to 14 million developers worldwide. Throughout the browser wars, the stagnation, and the corporate buyouts, it was this massive, grassroots open source community that constantly stepped in to push the platform forward. So, we leave you with this final thought. Java was built for interactive TV. It pivoted to web browsers, it dominated enterprise servers, and now it runs billions of mobile devices. As computing shifts violently toward an AI-driven future, what will the next 25 years demand from our digital foundation? If history is any indicator, this unkillable technology is already quietly evolving to meet it. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.